I think we're going to get started. We are going to record this session. We should have recorded the first one, but there's been a lot of interest. But of course, everybody knows that in Maine, today is a holiday, New England Patriots Day, so that may affect it. We had about 50 people that had confirmed attendance. Right now, I'm showing 19, but in the interest of everyone's time, we'll get started. So I'm Chris Martin. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Brewer Police Department. In attendance behind me is our Public Safety Director, Chief Jason Moffett. We were going to have him plugged in for some opening comments, but he's had some technical difficulties. So our speaker lineup today, you should have had an update. What we're going to do is I'm just going to turn it over to our speakers. They'll introduce themselves to the audience. They'll give their remarks, and at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A, and that should help things move along smoothly. And again, I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your day to listen in on this important information. What's happened in Oregon is up for grabs in Maine. This is the second time we're going to be viewing the potential of decriminalizing drug possession. And I think it's important that we hear from the impact in Oregon. The way that this played out in Oregon followed almost the same play sheet as what happened in Maine. It started with different legislative reforms. It was incremental, and it worked its way up to this. And I think that there's a cautionary tale that comes out of the impact in Oregon. So it's important to hear from them in their words, as opposed to us looking from the outside in. So our first speaker today is DA Carrie Rasmussen. Carrie, if you could tell them a little bit about yourself. And Carrie has some ties to Maine. I'm sure she'll talk about that. And Carrie, you have the floor.
Okay, great. And as always, just cut me off if I'm too long-winded. You know, we lawyers can take up a lot of room in that respect. Carrie Rasmussen, District Attorney of Hood River County, one of the smaller counties in Oregon. Actually, I guess we're categorized a mid-sized county at about 25,000 people. I'm speaking to you today as our elected district attorney, but also as a resident of Portland, Oregon. So yes, I commute every day from Portland to Little Hood River County. So I can speak also to the impacts of Measure 110 in the Portland area. I do come home, and I say home, every year to Mount Desert Island, and have a lot of ties in both Bar Harbor and Bass Harbor. I do prefer the quiet side for those of you who know the island well. And I'm going to be out there again this September if anybody wants me to personally meet with them. So Measure 110 has just been a disaster. And I'll start out with a quick quote from one of my judges here in Hood River County, who used to be a public defender. And he said, "I really hope that you can prevail in sending the message to Maine that this was a huge mistake." He and others voted for it, but now he and others have seen what a disaster it's been for our state. Now, Mr. Martin, do you want everybody to introduce themselves, or do you want me to launch into comments on the list that you gave to us?
Carrie, just run with it and talk as long as you need to or want to, and then the next speaker they'll just introduce themselves as they take the floor. Okay.
I'm a prosecutor here. I've been a prosecutor for 25 years in Oregon. But I'm also a founder in 2009 of our local child advocacy center. I'm not sure if you guys have child advocacy centers out there in Maine. It's called Safe Space here. And I bring that up because in my role as chair of that center and also as a child abuse prosecutor, I have seen the increased impacts on children, the number of interviews that we are doing at the center. I go to statewide center meetings as well as DA meetings, and I'm just shocked that this year that several district attorneys from other states and other center directors are saying that they're getting children who eat, fentanyl pills that look, very much like a Skittle. Coos County, Oregon, this year has had 2 toddler deaths due to ingestion of fentanyl. The fentanyl crisis has gotten so bad that I keep detailed statistics on all of the types of cases that we prosecute. And I've started just this year tracking fentanyl. And I include in my statistics as a fentanyl case everything from a driving under the influence where fentanyl is involved to they go into Walmart and steal a shopping cart full of groceries and their pockets are full of fentanyl. So those are both from my statistics, the types of cases that I would identify as a fentanyl case. Little Hood River is east along the Columbia Gorge River. If you guys look at a map, Portland's our biggest city, named after, as you all know, I'm sure, Portland, Maine. And we've really seen a trickle, and it's almost getting to be more than a trickle of, homelessness and the crime wave coming out of Portland and coming to our small community. Why is that devastating for a small community? Because, and this may be the case for you folks out there, I'll just dial down on driving under the influence. So our driving under the influence cases have skyrocketed in 2019, pre-pandemic, and before I took office. This office filed 262 driving under the influence cases, which is a lot for a small community in Oregon. In 2022, that had skyrocketed up to 292, so 30 more. Now the situation's more dire. My quarterly statistics, so the first quarter of 2023, this same time last year, I had 56 Dewey cases. I just got done this last quarter charging 90 Dewey cases. Those are very expensive for DA's offices to prosecute. And we've seen a huge increase in controlled substance Deweys. And I think that's directly related to Measure 110. Those are so expensive because, and I don't know how your crime lab works out there, but we have to get a warrant for the blood or urine and send that out to the state crime lab to prove that there are controlled substances in that urine or blood, even if the car is just full of controlled substances. And we have a 6-month backup. So all of our controlled substances Deweys have a 6-month backup. Add on to that any Dewey that involves a controlled substance is no longer a 1-day alcohol Dewey. It's a 2 or 3-day Dewey case because everybody gets experts and I have to bring in the lab techs. And so for a small office, that one type of caseload has greatly impacted my budget. I'm having a hard time even projecting for the county next year's budget associated just with Dewey crimes. I'll move on to theft. Here's the typical scenario. A car full of people from the Portland area, and I'll talk about Portland in a minute, will come here and just go brazenly into Walmart and walk out with 2 carts, thousands of dollars worth of merchandise, and load up their car. Now, given how crime is not necessarily being prosecuted as much in the Portland area, those criminals just expect that nobody's going to chase them down. Well, my law enforcement does. We chase them down on the highway, and 9 times out of 10 now, those large merchant retail theft cases involve huge quantities of fentanyl pills in the car. So they kind of go hand in hand. And so for a little community like mine in the last 2 years, I have several pending cases that involve well over 100 to 500 pills of fentanyl. Given our sentencing structure in Oregon, I can't send those people to prison. I can still charge a felony, but the sentencing has gone down for all sorts of drug crimes. And it's related to the legalization of drugs in general in Oregon. As prosecutors, we used to be able to charge a felony for possession of small quantities or even user quantities of methamphetamine, fentanyl. That is no longer the case, and the criminals know it. You can't be a functional human being, as you all know, when you're chronically on methamphetamine or fentanyl. So the only thing that you can do is, in my estimation, steal. And so in 2019, my theft, when I say theft, identity theft, forgery, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, which out here is just car theft, all those cases amounted to about 99 a year. By 2022, that rose to 154 a year. Again, a lot of those driven by having drugs on their person or somehow involved in the theft case. And then this year, the statistics are from the quarter of 2022 to this year, they've gone up 30% in just one quarter. So the trajectory is huge. And so the impact on crime is very real, but the impact on small communities that radiate from larger communities, and I guess Portland is your biggest city, so I would, worry for the jurisdictions, surrounding the Portland area. The crime migrates out, and the small communities start getting the big city crimes. And again, I hope Maine has better supported prosecutors' offices, but my small counties have not been able to plan for the influx of this increased prosecution of ancillary crimes. And so it's very costly, and it's very dangerous. I'll give you one more anecdote today. Defense attorney, we were waiting in court today to resolve our case, and he said, I'm a pretty liberal defense attorney. I'm a defense attorney, for Christ's sake. But I had to yell at some people at one of our local parks because they were just brazenly, openly using marijuana and other drugs near the play structure of our local playground. And so here's a defense attorney that was even disgusted and took it upon himself to confront folks. And so everybody is really just getting disgusted here in Oregon. So I've talked about crime trends. I've talked about public spaces. I don't want to, suck all of the air out of the room, but, my officers, there's different morale issues with officers in the state. My officers know that I am still prosecuting every theft that comes across my desk. I am tough on retail crime. I am tough on drug crimes. That's not necessarily always the case with different prosecutors in different jurisdictions, but it is pretty hard on officers to constantly be dealing with methamphetamine and fentanyl. And if we're talking just about a few pills, or even if we're talking amount of pills that could kill someone if somebody just ate them all, or certainly kill a toddler if they ate one, we're looking at a misdemeanor at best, or a violation thanks to Measure 110. Briefly, and you can ask me questions later, as a Portland resident, I'm appalled. I live close to the downtown area. I was just downtown last night, boarded up buildings all over the place. Businesses are pulling out of Portland. I believe this is the first year Multnomah County has had a decline in population for decades. I live in a fairly nice neighborhood near what's called the Gloyd Center area in Portland, and there are tents. There are tents in my neighborhood on the sidewalks. Homelessness is skyrocketed. Google Portland and the people living under the bridge. I mean, people are tunneling under our infrastructure to create strange housing situations, and it's all drug fueled. The officers had to wade through piles of needles and, excrement. And the impact on the mental health situation would take another whole Zoom meeting, but I'll just leave you with this and I'll end my comments. It has been devastating to the mental health of our formerly homeless population that in my 25 years seemed to, they would struggle with alcohol, methamphetamine. There were some successes. It's a different environment out there. I mean, fentanyl is just hijacking people and making them completely unreasonable. You can't even get them into treatment. Oh, and I did say that was my final comment, but it isn't. Really, my most important comment is Measure 110 was passed by the voters of Oregon because they promised treatment, and they promised this money would flow into the counties for treatment. It didn't happen. It was a giant lie. It was a fraud. If any money is going anywhere, it might be to boutique little programs in the Portland area or the bigger counties, but the little counties are suffering, and we're not getting any of that so-called money overflow. Just didn't happen. Thanks.
Carrie, the last Zoom meeting we had, you talked about drug endangered children at length. And the impact on that, and the fact that it was tying the hands of human services and whatnot. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, yes, and it would take a long time to expand on the full implications, and I risk alienating audiences who think that, legalization of marijuana is reasonable. But I think it started, frankly, with marijuana. I mean, people do not realize how dangerous marijuana is. The current marijuana is not your 70s marijuana. You all know that. But how dangerous that is to the developing minds of children who now are just living in smoke clouds. And there's nothing that we can do because that's definitely not illegal. It's just like a cigarette. So, I've gone to special medical seminars that talk about the transmission of various controlled substances, including marijuana, that gets the THC levels get, focused in the breast milk. I know I'm getting in the weeds here, but I think it's just a general misunderstanding that started with marijuana, and it's now progressing to meth and fentanyl about these drugs aren't dangerous. People think they used to tell us marijuana was dangerous. Well, we know better. It, makes us safer, better parents, blah, blah, blah. Well, it doesn't. Kids are having, brain impacts and health impacts because of it. And so now the same folks, and again, I know nobody wants to hear gateway drug, blah, 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 but methamphetamine, in my experience, as also a drug prosecutor, most people who are using methamphetamine and fentanyl also have marijuana. That there's a symbiosis between using the drugs. They use multiple types of drugs to regulate what kind of high or coming down they want. And so it's, I think, culturally kind of equalized all of those very serious, dangerous drugs. In other words, I think younger people are thinking that it's okay to experiment with fentanyl because, after all, my parents, my friends experimented with marijuana, and since now it's all somewhat legal, let's all have fun with it. And we're getting kids dying here in Oregon. So there's a neglect aspect that I think has gone back to the legalization of marijuana days, but that's over and done with. We're never going to go back on that. But there's a more serious neglect issue with fentanyl and methamphetamine and hard drugs just being left out in homes, left in parks. I mean, especially in Portland, you go to a park and you're going to find a needle in that park. And so, yes, endangerment has gone up. We've had several fentanyl deaths here in my small county. I was devastated to see that, one kiddo that died of fentanyl was somebody I dealt with in dependency. In Oregon, dependency is removing children from dangerous homes. And so, I don't know if that is directly sort of a general answer to your question, but I think it's the summary of that long-winded comment was, if you're going to legalize hard drugs, it's going to get normalized to marijuana. And then people get the message that it's all the same, it's all treated the same, and it's all one big party. And it's a party that's causing death.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Next up, we have Chief Marcia Hardin. Marcia, if you'd introduce yourself to the audience and talk about the impacts as you see it.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody, or almost evening out there on the East Coast. My name is Marcia Hardin. I'm the Chief of Police in Albany, Oregon, which is about an hour and 10 minutes south of the city of Portland. Interstate 5 runs right through our city, and Interstate 5 runs from the Mexican border to the Canadian border through Seattle, Los Angeles, etc. So it's considered a major pipeline. My city is in 2 counties. We're one of those lucky ones where we have a river that runs through it, and I'm in 2 counties. I have 2 district attorneys I work for, one of which Carrie knows well, and Doug Martini, who's very aggressive on whatever he can prosecute. And then I have another DA in Benton County that has a little bit different tone to how he goes about it, which that complicates things for us a little bit. I've been the chief here for 3.5 years. I spent most of my career in Washington State in a city called Bellevue, which is right across Lake Washington from Seattle. So for those of you, I strongly recommend you see the documentary noted in the chat. Seattle is Dying. There is another documentary. I'll find the name after my portion is done. But that's really what Seattle and Portland have turned into. Very concerning for us. The city of Albany is a medium-sized city. We're just approaching 60,000 people. I have about 66 police officers that work here. And we are a Linn County, LINN is a HIDA county. So we have HIDA designation as a high intensity drug trafficking area. I am the chair of the Oregon-Idaho HIDA, which covers all of our HIDA counties in Oregon and Idaho. There's some interesting statistics that came out from 2022. I'm happy to share with you, Chris, to share with the group. That talks about the impacts of decriminalization and how that has grossly impacted in a negative way the influx of illegal drugs and drug trafficking into our state. It's off the charts. We have seized more than 400% more fentanyl than we did 4 years ago. So it's just flooding in. As far as child endangerment, just like Carrie said, we've seen our cases as well. I sit on the Tri-County Substance Abuse Coalition. So it's Lincoln County, which is on the coast, Benton County, and Linn County. And a part of that, which is wonderful, is our healthcare providers are on those calls monthly as well. We discuss monthly what we're seeing, and the hospitals are seeing 12, 13, 14-year-olds coming in with overdoses into the ER. We very closely track all of our overdose calls, both in my city and in the county, and report those to HIDA. We're on a system called OD Maps that shows you Portland is on it as well. You can kind of see the hot spots of overdoses in the area, but we are seeing the younger part. And you're also seeing us work closely with our school districts to get Narcan and naloxone added to our schools. It's just a matter of time. As far as homelessness, we're nowhere near what Portland is seeing and what Carrie sees, but we are seeing some huge impacts. It's my firm belief homelessness is a symptom of substance abuse and mental health issues, and neither one of those. Oregon ranks 50th and 51st in the country for care in both of those areas. And that's the frustrating part of this ballot measure that was passed by the voters. Is we are almost 3 years out from the passage of this ballot measure, and hardly any money has come out. Meanwhile, hundreds of people have died in the state. So it's very, very frustrating, and no accountability for where the money goes. Even with a governor change this year, all three candidates, including the one that did win the election, believes that this has been a failure. It needs to be fixed. We're actually about to, if it passes both houses, recriminalize certain smaller amounts of fentanyl. And it's a constant fight to try to recriminalize items. My advice is don't decriminalize everything, reform the system. Look at it, take the DUI approach of the escalating penalties for our lack of participation in treatment. So very similar to your DUI courts. Diversion, and then diversion with incarceration, and then incarceration if they're not getting the message. The impact of the business community also comes out of our mental health and homelessness issues. That's going to tie into your property crimes, which we've seen go up. Our violent crime, we just had a murder this weekend, fueled more than likely by meth and mental illness, where a gentleman 1 day out of jail beat his mother to death. So definitely seen some impacts based on that. Our residents are also getting frustrated. Like Carrie said, I've talked to many people who in theory thought ballot measure 110 was a great thing, but now if they could do it over again, and if they knew fentanyl was coming, they would have voted differently. So things to consider there. We too we're also a little bit hamstrung by some laws about homelessness in the state of Oregon, and it really restricts our city's ability to control illegal encampments. We have a part of the law that's going to take effect July 1st that really restricts our open public spaces enforcement of camping. So we're working on that, and that's all very much tied to people that are service resistant that just want to have a place to get high. And we just continually chase that problem around our city. Again, we're seeing crime pop up, very similar to what Carrie saw. Our auto theft, petty crimes, burglaries, shoplifts are through the roof for sure. And we're struggling to get those taken seriously in our courts based on some recent reforms in sentencing and incarceration. As far as recruitment and retention, yeah, it's frustrating. We have one individual. We also track the number of individuals we've brought back with naloxone, and we brought one gentleman back 5 times. And trying to get him into a inpatient bed to get him stabilized, to get him away from it, there's nothing there. And so it's very frustrating to our staff because we keep going and saving the same people over and over again, only to have no place to take them because the services are not there. And again, it is having an impact on the hospitals and our schools. One thing that you have on the East Coast that we are now starting to see here on the West Coast is fentanyl is being mixed with a substance that street is called tranq. It's xylazine, and we are seeing it here now. It's making our ability to bring people back from overdose very cumbersome, and the hospitals are now trying to wrap their minds around that. Why anybody would take an animal tranquilizer on purpose, they may not know they're doing it, but we are seeing it, so it's having an impact on hospitals. My county area here does not have a detox or stabilization or crisis resource center facility. Another problem in the state, there's no services like that. So if we have somebody that is out of control, continues to commit petty crimes, that's high or has overdosed and just needs some place to be stabilized and then getting into some treatment, the only places we have are jail and the ERs, and that is not an acceptable place to be as far as I'm concerned. I've done this for 30 years. I've never seen a system so broken as it is in the state. And by decriminalizing drugs is just pour gasoline on that fire. And some lessons learned, I would slow down, be very cautious about any decriminalization. I will absolutely tell you that your first or second users that are caught by police don't necessarily need a day in jail. A lot of people don't want to go into that life, and we want to have options for them. But having come from a family of addicts and alcoholics, most of which said that if they hadn't spent time in jail, they would not be alive today. We no longer have that option in the state unless they commit a major felony alongside that drug users. If they're just shooting up heroin or shooting up fentanyl in front of their kids, absolutely nothing we can do about it unless it impacts the welfare of those children. And even as Carrie said, that is very difficult to deal with as well. And I'll close out a story. The saddest event that I've seen so far is a 9-year-old who lived with his 2 younger siblings with dad, kicked in the bathroom door to find that his dad had overdosed on fentanyl and died, leaving all 3 children without any parents. Mother was out of the picture. And so we had to step in and care for those children for 12 hours until relatives could get in from out of state to take care of them. And now these kids, the father was a low-grade heroin user, maintenance heroin user, and got a dose that was hot with fentanyl and overdosed in the bathroom. And his 9-year-old kicked in the door to find him dead. So that's what you're going to get if you just open that floodgate.
Chief, thank you very, very, very much. And, what can you say to that story? Next, we're going to go to Captain Ryan Martin of the State Police, Oregon State Police. Ryan?
Hello, everyone. Captain Ryan Martin with the Oregon State Police. I'm the director of our Criminal Investigations Division. And Chris, if I could share my screen.
Don't ask me how. I can't help you, man.
It says it's disabled on my end, so.
Hang on. We got Sergeant Karen. Can you tackle that and give him control? We're working on it.
I should be able to now, sir.
All right, let me take a look here. All right. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Yep.
All right, as I was stating, I'm the director of our criminal investigations division. I carry responsibility of managing over 118 personnel statewide with regards to our mission as a criminal investigations division for the Department of State Police. We're a support services agency for local law enforcement and our agency partners throughout the state, throughout the various counties that we have, as well as our city municipalities, especially in our more rural areas where they don't have adequate resources to address criminal investigations. With that, I've got major crime section, which is responsible for what we call Measure 11 crimes. Those are crimes that are of greater severity and violence that result in mandatory minimum sentencing provisions. In addition to that, a drug enforcement section. We have an arson investigation unit, an explosives unit, digital forensics unit tied into our digital forensics labs throughout the state, as well as Joint Terrorism Task Force and U.S. Marshals Fugitives team. So with that, I appreciate the fact that Kerry brought forward discussion with regards to the legalization of marijuana. That was done through ballot measure 91 back in 2014, in which we had legalized marijuana in the state of Oregon. And the process thereof, there was a setup through the taxation of marijuana that funding would go back to local agencies and law enforcement to include 15% of the tax revenues to the Department of State Police. The intent was to use those funds to address illicit marijuana cultivation and exportation, as well as to assist with the criminal investigations that our agency carries responsibility for. What that did for the Department of State Police is we added a sergeant and a team in Northwest region, and then eventually it culminated in the creation of a team in Southern Oregon due to the number of outdoor grows that are believed to be associated with Mexican cartels. And these are large operations to include a search warrant that we had conducted in October of 2021, in which over 500,000 pounds of illicit marijuana was seized at a location. A couple months prior, in August of 21, we executed search warrants in conjunction with the local law enforcement agencies down in Southern Oregon, and the location was over 1,300 acres, had over 130 laborers working on site. And that investigation stemmed from the death of a laborer based on malnutrition and exposure issues. And that warrant, there was over 200,000 marijuana plants, and it was an illicit grow. And so we've had issues in Southern Oregon with marijuana for illicit cultivation on exterior grows. And then in our northern region, we have more interior grows, indoor grows where excessive amounts of marijuana are being grown indoors. Basically what Oregon did at that point, since we were one of the first states to legalize marijuana, is we became an export state, which means marijuana was cultivated here, and then ultimately it was distributed across the country to the eastern seaboard. Ultimately, we don't have enough resources to be able to deal with that issue. So as we continue to have problems with illicit marijuana, we continue to send resources and focus our resource efforts in our drug enforcement section on illicit marijuana. That took resources away from other areas of drug enforcement, as Chief Harnden referred to with the high intensity drug trafficking area. We are a party of that agreement. There are 13 HIDTA initiative teams throughout the state of Oregon. And at one point in time, the Department of State Police had representation and members on 10 out of those 13 HIDTA initiative teams. Currently, because of shifting resources to marijuana and recruitment, retention, and attrition issues, we are now down to representation on 4 of those HIDTA initiative teams. And I'll show you a little bit later where that has impacted our numbers in relation to dismantling and disrupting DTOs. So when we talk about ballot measure 110, I think you can see from the screen that we have here, there was an audit that was recently conducted by the Oregon Secretary of State, and everything that I reference here is going to be a publicly available document that you'll be able to pull this information from. I would strongly encourage each and every one of you to take a look at the audit by the Secretary of State's office. because it's going to talk about some of the issues that we're having with ballot measure 110. And so as you can see from here, it's too early to tell. And there's been some legislators throughout the states. The political buzzword of the day became that ballot measure 110 is an experiment. And based on this audit and considering the fact that it's been labeled as an experiment, I would say it definitely is too early to tell for other states to use Oregon as a beginning point in decriminalization of controlled substances. I think we need to continue to look at this issue. There's been a number of bills introduced in this legislative session to address the deficiencies of ballot measure 110, to do a 180 and completely reverse the effects of ballot measure 110. And we're still in the middle of the legislative process and looking at how those bills are going to move forward. So I would just say, from my side of it, it's too early to tell, and you guys probably need to just wait just a little bit to kind of see how this experiment continues to unfold. Some of the highlights in the audit, and this was referenced by Chief Harnden, is we do have the second highest rate of substance abuse and use disorder in the nation. We're ranked 50th for access to treatment. In Oregon, more than 2 people died each day from unintentional opioid overdoses in 2021. The U.S. experiences over $700 billion in costs related to crime, poor health, and lost work productivity from untreated substance abuse disorders. Ballot measure 110, which was passed with 58% of the vote, is the first in the nation program decriminalizing drug possession and allocating over $100 million per year in cannabis revenue to expand treatment services. The advocates of ballot measure 110 hoped that it would succeed, where previous recovery and treatment efforts have failed, especially when it comes to the underrepresented communities, Black and Indigenous communities, and people of color. What the audit found, and you'll see the link there for the actual audit that you can pull, is there's a significant risk that policymakers and the public will be unable to gauge the impact and effectiveness of ballot measure 110 due to existing grant management and data collection efforts. When this was initially set up, all the parameters were not in place. It wasn't a well thought out plan. It was a voter approved initiative. And so the groundwork had not been laid, and we didn't have the framework to not only collect the data, but then also have a system in place for grant management to ensure that those funds were distributed accordingly. Program governance, including the organizational structure of the Oversight and Accountability Council, needs to be improved. Roles and responsibilities under Measure 110 were not clear. The existing system faces multiple silos and fragmentation. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's probably the same in Maine, but we have multiple silos of fragmentation in state government. It's bureaucracy at its best. It's the way government works. And so without that framework in place, they didn't really define what the roles and responsibilities were to the entities that were going to be involved in that. The Oregon Health Authority failed to provide enough support to ensure implementation of ballot measure 110 and to ensure the success. And so we've kind of already talked about it being an experiment, but there's more work to be done. And I believe Chief Harnden also referenced that it's a better chance for reform versus just going with an all-out approach to decriminalization. And then obviously the grant application process needs to be more efficient and consistent. And so this is just the basic highlights of what the audit brought forward, but I'd strongly recommend that you take a look at the audit more in depth. I think there's going to be more studies. There's a bill in this session that talks about studying the impacts of 110 and coming up with the data collection and how we could do better as far as grant management is concerned. So this is a slide from our Ways and Means Committee presentation where the Department of State Police has the opportunity to go before the Joint Committee for Ways and Means to discuss our budget moving forward. And this information came from our Patrol Services Division. They are responsible for overseeing our patrol canine program, which fluctuates between about 6 to 8 dogs statewide in strategic locations. And these are the seizures that we had in 2021 and 2022 with regards to what has been seized on the road. And that's out of 350 total canine applications. With that, kind of take a special look at fentanyl pills and fentanyl powder. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration, 1 kilogram of fentanyl has the potential to kill approximately 500,000 people. And with this and taking this into account, our canine units intercepted enough fentanyl powder to kill 7,771,000 people. 42% of the pills that were tested for fentanyl contained at least 2 milligrams of fentanyl. And with that, 279,000 pills potentially contained a lethal dose. So when you consider that in total, more than 8 million fatal doses of fentanyl were taken off the street over the previous 2 years by 6 to 8 canines that we have employed throughout the state. So these are the Oregon, Idaho HIDTA seizures that came out of the 2022 annual report that Chief Herndon talked about. You'll see some trends here. Historically, these numbers are from 2018 moving forward to 2022. You'll see that generally methamphetamine seizures, when you look at the numbers, we're about the median, but the number of seizures are trickling down. When you look at fentanyl seizures, those are through the roof, clearly. Cocaine seizures are also up, and then heroin is down. And then you'll see with marijuana, our 2021 numbers were really high, but we had some very large operations to include that 500,000 pound operation in Southern Oregon, which skewed our numbers. But you look at the 2022 numbers in comparison with the 2020 numbers, and it's still at least a 400% increase. So also from the annual HIDTA report, you'll see the number of DTOs, and this is drug trafficking organizations that meet the definition by HIDTA that were dismantled and or disrupted by our various drug teams throughout the state. Historically, all the way back to 2019 and moving forward prospectively to 2022. And you'll see that in 2022, we disrupted or dismantled 80 drug trafficking organizations based on the numbers that we have both in Oregon and Idaho. And then what you'll see in this slide is the key performance measures that I'm responsible for testifying before the Joint Ways and Means Committee on for the Criminal Investigations Division. We classify as key performance measure number 7. This is our target for our drug enforcement section within the Criminal Investigations Division. And in 2022, our target was increased by the legislature to 45 drug trafficking organizations on an annual basis. And you'll see from looking at our numbers, there's a downward trend from 2017 into 2019. And then we had a big spike in 2020, and then we trended downward since then. Historically, back in 2017, our target was 25 drug trafficking organizations, and it has since increased to 45. Where you see the downward trend is when we're shifting more resources into illicit cultivation and distribution of marijuana cases. Currently, I run a 1/3 vacancy rate in my drug enforcement section. That's based on attrition. Also, I think you probably know back in Maine, the same problem that we're having here nationally is an inability to recruit and retain law enforcement officers these past couple of years. This has not been a career field that a lot of people have been incentivized to get into. And that hasn't had an impact. When I look at things from the Criminal Investigations Division, obviously violent crime is always going to take precedence. So we tend to ensure that our major crime section is staffed regularly, but that has taken a toll on our drug enforcement section. Also with that, I cannot fill vacancies currently up in the Portland metropolitan area. I have 3 drug enforcement section vacancies currently there because we're having a hard time recruiting troopers to work in the Portland metropolitan area. And so with that, our patrol staffing is less than it should be, and I can't get detectives out of patrol until we have patrol troopers that are out there working in the patrol offices. And then out of the remaining 2/3 in my drug enforcement section, half of that has been assigned to illicit cultivation and distribution of marijuana because of ballot measure 91. And so I am running with less staff than I need to be able to address the drug trafficking organizations through our HIDTA initiative teams and our task forces throughout the state. So our DTO numbers are down. That also impacts the numbers for HIDTA as well. And then with that, I can stand for any questions. I'll take screen sharing off, or we can hold the questions towards the end.
I think we'll hold off till the end, and then we'll circle back around to you. So I think next up is, did Matt Ferguson, Sergeant Ferguson, get in? He was having some technical difficulties. We don't have Matt. Okay. I'm I think we can open it up for questions. Any questions for the panelists at this point? Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chris. I am just wondering if DA Rasmussen, as well as Mr. Martin, might be able to actually testify on some of these bills before the legislature. I think that what they have for material is really powerful in trying to deal with these issues as they come before the legislature, and they are outside of the Maine context. So I think that they would add value from already having been through this reality. So I'm wondering if they might be willing to testify on this bill as it moves forward.
I would, as long as it's through Zoom. How long is your legislative session?
The legislative session is scheduled to end mid-June. However, at this trajectory, I think it might extend beyond that. And they do hybrid testimony on all of the bills of public interest. And you could use Zoom in order to do that. And I'd be happy to take on actually informing you of that if Chris is willing to share some of that contact info.
Oh, sure. You can reach out to me on the email that Chris has.
Yep, if everyone should have an attachment that has contact information for our panelists. So with that, Representative Underwood.
Yes, I had a couple of questions. First of all, what are some of the characteristics of a bad prosecutorial candidate? Because something like what George Soros maybe have gotten in Philadelphia or New York or maybe Chicago or a couple of these other bad cities that have bad prosecutors who go after anybody and anything and like to reduce crime. And if we could nip it in the bud or have some ideas to what to look for here in Maine for possible characteristics of a candidate that would do some of these things, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
You know, I think that might be a ripe topic for a longer discussion at another time. I'd certainly be able to have personal contact with you about that issue. I will just say in summary that I think that it is kind of a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous thing to say there are good prosecutors and bad prosecutors and good qualities and bad qualities, because I do think that we're all trying to come up with creative solutions. And sometimes a so-called progressive prosecutor will bring some new and different and important energy to the discussion. And it adds to the overall success of dealing with these very complex problems. So I'll just leave it at that. I'd be happy to share with you privately other thoughts, but I think more than separating folks in terms of political attitudes, it's just helpful if we all kind of talk about a common problem.
Thank you.
Pat Kimball.
So I apologize, I'm going to have to get off the call after this, but the thing that strikes me as I listen to this is how eye-opening it is, and that the severity of what's happening in these states that decided to make this determination to criminalize. I would hate Maine to see Maine go there. I liked the comment very much when it talked about that we can change our system. Because we all know that we have too many people incarcerated, probably that don't need to be incarcerated, that need to be in treatment. And so is there a way to figure out how to redesign our system so that people in need of treatment can get the treatment they need versus incarcerating people particularly for small amounts of that. But I think that it's frightening to listen to this for me. For people who don't know who I am, I've worked 35 years in the field of substance abuse and mental health. And I don't think Maine is prepared. And if that's the direction Maine wants to go in, it's got a lot of work to do before anything like this happens, or we're going to lose more lives than we currently are. And we all know that we are dangerously every day losing people to this illness and to fentanyl overdoses. And we're trying to get a handle on it. I just, again, I hope that the legislators that are listening take and learn from others who went into this too quickly and look at it very carefully before we make that step. But again, I think we have an opportunity to do some excellent reform, and that reform can help save lives and saves families and save children. And I think for me, listening to this, that would be the direction that I see myself supporting. But thank you very much. The information is very informative for me. And again, I apologize. I'm going to have to get off in a few minutes. But keep me in the loop, Chris, please.
I will. Senator Baldacci?
I just want to thank Chris. Thank you very much. Thank the law enforcement people from Oregon. I was one of, as I told you, Chris, when this came up for a vote in the state Senate last year, I was one of 6 Democrats that voted to kill it successfully with the Republican members. And I intend to keep voting to kill it because we are not prepared to have decriminalization. We don't have the treatment options in place. And I think that the information provided today is extremely eye-opening and really justifies the decision that some of us made to kill the decriminalization effort, because we're not prepared, and we're not prepared for the flood of overdoses that are going to happen. We're already suffering. So, but I would ask if I would hope if you could coordinate with some of the prosecutors. I think it would be helpful if the county prosecutors talk to the legislators in their counties to make sure that they're hearing this message loud and clear, Chris, because I think it's really important. I'd like to see the county prosecutors in Maine become involved to lobby their legislators in their counties on this issue. It will help out our further debates on this. I'm not on the committee that votes on it, but I do vote for, like I said, I voted against it on the floor of the Senate, and I intend to, but it would be helpful if the county prosecutors in Maine got involved to help educate their legislators. And I look forward to, and I agree that if the Oregon people could also be on Zoom for some of the testimony with the committees that are dealing with it, that would be helpful. So thank you very much for the invite, and I look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you, Senator. And before I get to you, Carrie, just want to double check. Did we manage to get Matt Ferguson on, or Chief Hensman?
Chief Hensman's in a budget meeting, but I am here for him.
Aha, wonderful. You have the floor, sir. If you'd introduce yourself to people, and it is yours.
Yeah, ironically enough, he's fighting for funding across the parking lot for our department. So it's important for him to be there. So my name is Todd Moran. I'm a police captain here at the city of Grants Pass. And geographically, if you look at the state of Oregon, we are about 50 miles north of the California border, probably as far south as any other agency, or further south than any other agency on this Zoom call from Portland, but we still have a significant issue here. Big thank you to OSP and putting some of their folks back on our HIDTA drug task force. So we're hoping that they can get back up and running again and start influencing some of the stuff, the drug trafficking organizations that have made their way into Southern Oregon. And I agree also with Carrie about the marijuana. Kind of that's where it did start here, at least in Southern Oregon. We have all of the other hard drug stuff here, but we also have those 2 large search warrants that that Captain Martin was talking about were down here in Southern Oregon, and one of them did start from a guy that was dropped off dead at a gas station in Cave Junction, Oregon. Was a migrant, but was not really there on his own will. It's really turned into involuntary servitude, human trafficking, and all kinds of bad elements that come along with that, with the hard drugs. I did put into chat some of the statistics for the Lines for Life. If you guys don't know, if you're caught with those hard drugs and it's not a commercial drug offense as far as the quantity goes, you're given a citation to appear in court for the offense. And until ballot measure 110 was voted in, we didn't even have a Class E violation. We had to make it up to make it the least offensive we could. So it's just, you know, and it probably goes, it's important to say also that this wasn't pushed by Oregon voters. This was I think it was the Drug Alliance that pushed this out of the East Coast. It was in, I believe it was New York. So it wasn't even something that was on our radar necessarily. We weren't asked about what we thought as far as law enforcement goes. And, it's just been an absolute failure. Our constituents here in town are impacted by just about every level of what is on the list of stuff, and I won't go back over it, but we are definitely feeling the crunch here. And one of the things that Chief Hensman wanted to make sure happened when ballot measure 110 was put into effect was that we were going to issue a citation for every violation of ballot measure 110 that we came across. And we continue to do that. And we are by far the leading agency when it comes to issuing citations, because we do believe that if they do not have the data to show it's a failure, they're going to say it's a success. And so we were a little disappointed around the state to see other people not follow that. Looks like some of the folks are starting to do that now with their agencies, but it's super important that we show them where it's failed, because they will absolutely take all those no more prosecutions as a positive, and show that it's actually a success. So that's about all I have, Chris. We'll let other people have already covered most of that. So thanks.
So one of the things that we've covered probably in depth the first Zoom meeting was the fact that even people issued citations. And for the folks in Maine, when they created a Class E offense in Oregon, that was the equivalent of a civil offense in Maine. So not to be confused with a Class E misdemeanor in Maine. This was the equivalent of a civil offense that has no criminal applicabilities to it. When people were issued a summons, they could call a number and subscribe for services, or they could pay the fine, or they could show up for a hearing. And the data which was attached to the packet that all the participants should have right now, all the listeners should have, shows that it was a very, very low percentage of folks who ever took advantage of the treatment. Many just didn't show up to court. Many just didn't pay the fine. There was no impetus for change. There's no consequence. It was a all carrot, no stick approach.
Yeah, you could pay it. You could pay the fine, or you can totally ignore it. Nothing happens either way.
Yeah, and so that didn't do anything for demand reduction. One of the things I'd like to do with the panelists as we kind of wrap things up is I want to bring it down to what's it like on the streets? What is the overall impact for your business owners, whether they're mom and pop stores, they're a pharmacy, they're a grocery store? What is the impact for the business community? What is the impact for your residents? Whether they're trying to get into parks, open spaces. What is the impact on the officers? Are we developing a sense of apathy, or we just, where we're giving up and saying, I guess we just have to embrace this as our normal? But if you could describe to people that are listening, what has been the overall feel out on the street, in the community and with the people out there performing services. And we can start at Carrie and go to Marcia and then Ryan, and we'll close with you.
Thank you. You know, my hand was raised because I'm just going to make a quick note before I follow up on your request there. I do want to respond to Senator Baldacci's comments, as well as Pat Kimball's, and also, you know, the very good point that Representative Underwood made, and that is, I know we're looking for a simple solution, and this is a really complex problem. It is not about good or bad prosecutors, demoralized police officers. But I think, unfortunately, my advice to you is to synthesize a message and own it. Something like Measure 110 dismantled whole systems in Oregon without any concurrent planning of creating something that would help. You can't just legalize drugs and decimate a longstanding law enforcement response, which granted many people might have been frustrated with it, you know, and there are many good people that were upset about their family members and friends in prison. But you have to give them also the message that you just can't blow things up. And that's what Measure 110 is. So, you know, OSP, I believe Sergeant Martin noted that in his advice, you move very slowly if your state's going to look at this. I personally would say don't move slowly, don't move at all towards legalization. But if your community or your population has this idea that the criminal justice system isn't working, you need to rebut that. And you need to tell them Oregon exploded their system and this is what they've got. We're last on so many levels. And so back to your point that you wanted us to end on the street, it's really different county by county. And that's why I think Representative Underwood's question maybe gets to this point. You know, different prosecutors have different methods of coming at it. And I'm not saying one way is the right way or the wrong way, because it is so complex. It isn't just a law enforcement problem. It's a mental health problem, like Pat Kimball was saying, and it is a medical problem, and it is, you know, schools. And not to bog you down with how complex it is, but people need to understand Measure 110 was too simplistic. It didn't have all the players at the table, and we're all the ones suffering for it. So in my community, my officers are demoralized kind of at the trajectory of the laws and where they're going. I think that they're pretty happy with my, you know, prosecutorial ideas, but I miss having the hammer of somebody hitting bottom. And I've learned that from the treatment community. And for some people, hitting bottom is the specter of prison or jail. And if they don't have some sort of hammer, then they're just going to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And it's really irresponsible in Oregon. It is irresponsible that we did not plan for what has happened to our state. And I just hope it doesn't happen in Maine.
Thank you, Carrie. Marcia, you're up.
I'm going to echo most of what Carrie said. It is a very complex situation, and it requires a complex and coordinated and partnered response. This is not a law enforcement problem. This is not a prosecutor problem. It's all of our problems, and we have to work together. For us, I don't know if we can ever unring that bell. There's no going back. Repeal is not likely to happen in this state. We're hoping that our elected officials fix it. For those elected officials from Maine on a call, I would use a lot of caution here. The ripple effects were what we kind of expected, but it way worse at the same time, because this hit with COVID, is hit with fentanyl and the like. So the mass exodus out of policing is complex as well. Part of it in this state is related to that, but a lot of it has to do with the overall sentiment nationwide towards police officers. But
my point is it's had a profound impact on a lot of people in the city. The only people who are happy about it are the drug dealers, and we can't even hold them accountable when they sell something they know is likely to kill another human being. We don't have a law in the books to punish dealers that sell substances that kill other human beings, although our DA has been creative and been able to get some negligent homicide convictions out of it, but we don't have anything to deal with it. So, and there's also some complex criminal justice reforms that have made the entire approach to criminal justice much more complicated with unintended consequences for us. So, yeah, we have some frustrated citizens that don't feel that they have control over how to protect their businesses, how to protect their children, things like that. I'll absolutely tell you the other thing, I don't know if we've touched on it, maybe on the last call, ballot measure 110 was silent on juveniles, which was a very scary place to be. And I know we're trying to fix that. And I don't know if we've gotten to the point where we've changed the flavored tobacco law here, that's on the books right now, but you could have higher penalties for selling, if it's banned, selling flavored tobacco products would have a higher penalty than selling drugs, which just boggles my mind. So we're a little backwards on some things, and but again, I don't know if we can unring some of this and bring back some sense, or it'll take a long time to do it.
Thank you, Chief. Captain Martin?
Yeah, the only thing I just want to add, Chris, is it's not just the decriminalization that came about through ballot measure 110. There was constitutional implications to the voter approved initiative, in addition to other case laws we've had in the state of Oregon that have, for all intents and purposes, handcuffed our officers' ability to do their job effectively. You know, when you look at the ability to arrest someone for possession of a controlled substance, when they're up to no good, drugs always lead to property crimes and eventually violent crimes at some point or another. But you remove that ability to take them off the streets and put them into a system where they already have a process set up, like Carrie had alluded to, with drug courts and others that mandate people to get the kind of treatment that they should be getting, versus making it a voluntary approach like we've done with ballot measure 110. It doesn't help them, you know, cure the disease, if you will, or assist them with their addiction. And the court process in the past, when it was a crime, helped us to be able to do that. And there is a direct relationship to property crime and violent crime because of a controlled substance issue. So I just feel like it's like Chief Harnden had referred to, it's not just a ballot measure 110 issue, it's a collective issue statewide that we've been addressing for years now. But I do like how DA Rasmussen brought up ballot measure 91 and the legalization of marijuana, and it's just been nothing but a progression to the negative side for us since then.
Thanks, Ryan. And then how about Todd? Are you still with us?
Yeah. So
You
the
have
only
the
thing I would say is that you know, we're on track to double our overdose stats already. We've seen what we believe is almost kind of like a drug tourism type of thing take place here in Southern Oregon. People know that there are no consequences for their actions here, and so you know, it's very unkind to leave people in this addiction that they're in, and we just don't really have the means to, you know, force them out of it anymore. And you know, I think our drug court would echo that same thing. That's all I got, please.
Chris, I think you're muted.
I'm muted. See, I'm technically not savvy. Todd, I just had a follow-up question. I think your chief alluded to it on our first Zoom meeting. What's been the impact on your business community, the shops and stuff, with respect to thefts and all that?
Yeah, so much like the Portland area, probably our biggest location of retail theft is our local Walmart. I don't know if that's the same across the nation. It seems to be, but you know, they are, you know, a huge drain on our resources. just about every shoplifter that we have for theft, there's always a ballot measure 110 site affixed to the report, almost without exception. Our local mom and pop stores in the downtown are frustrated because people are in the doorways, which is, you know, another thing for, you know, homelessness piece. We're currently battling a legal fight over a lawsuit that we're defending. It's going to have implications across all the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals cities and areas. So it's really hamstringed us on how to enforce the activities of the homeless and not make it about the class of homeless. But the drug culture within the homeless itself is rampant. They have harm reduction programs in force here, and we're finding needles and, you know, glass bongs that people are handing out, you know, smoking devices, and our parks are almost unusable. It's just it's bad.
The other follow-up I had, I believe your chief talked about this in our first Zoom that we had in February, was that your experience has been that you've had people that were unsheltered that migrated to your area because of they could use drugs and not be held accountable. It was kind of like a destination area.
Yeah, that's what I alluded to earlier about just kind of a drug tourism you know, feel. We've had people come in to say there's really no consequences, and it's statewide. I'm sure we're not the only ones feeling that, but you know, the city's motto is it's the climate, and we really do have a nice climate here. It's where you could survive outside relatively easy, and the services are large and plentiful for folks that are experiencing houselessness. But a lot of them choose to remain in that and stay, you know, in those public areas where we really have a hard time enforcing, you know, laws against them being there.
As we wrap things up, I just want to thank everybody again, our panelists, and for the audience out there. Please understand that this is our second such Zoom meeting where we have professionals across the country that care enough about the impact of this, that they were willing to give their time to us to help give us some information as Maine struggles with finding how to proceed forward. I mean, that's huge. I didn't know any of these professionals until we reached out to Oregon asking for input. And these folks stepped up and they said, we're willing to talk with you. And they're willing to talk with everybody who's in attendance today and moving forward. So we really appreciate you folks. We appreciate you taking time, and it's coming from a sense of caring and you know, a desire to see good done with this. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, and with that, we'll wrap things up. And again, you should have speaker bios if you have further follow-up questions. There's also the data from ballot measure 110 that's in your packets, and as well as the survey that executives from Oregon had given us. So thank you, everybody, for your time, and I greatly appreciate all of you. Thank you.